Awesome. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction, Garrett. It's lovely to be here with you to discuss a difficult topic. As hard as it is, it's still always kind of a meaningful experience to be able to talk to people about the emotional side of grief and coping with loss and change. And there has been a lot of it. There probably always has been, but I think the times of COVID really highlighted that. And I think we're just in the wake of what was left over. And so it's going to be a really good opportunity to just come together and discuss what's on our hearts. So as Garrett said, my name is Josephine Tite, and I operate a company outside of Calgary, Alberta called Positivity Center. I know the name, but you don't have to worry about me being that Pollyanna kind of be happy person here or have that approach to life and care. I know that life includes suffering and that we need to be here for one another in that. So that is what I'm here to do with you. But anyways, we do enhance the well-being of organizations, and we do that by particularly working on enhancing the well-being of their people. And for us, we really like caregiving is basically a loose organization. It may be a little less formal, but it is an organization that is critical and essential to care. And so we, over the years have shifted our focus and made this a priority and started creating supportive resources for caregivers. And then through that journey of being a founder of Positivity Center, I was able to coach elders who lived in long-term care and be there for their family members. I've worked with organizations as a consultant and worked from anyone as a president or frontline workers and everyone else in between, taking care of residents, their family members. And I usually got introduced to people who were like, oh, needing a lift from being in depression, or people who really never participated in social activities or community outings and that kind of thing. And so it's been a really interesting journey. And I also had the opportunity to be a part-time care partner with my godmother. So it really opened my eyes to the experience of being not just watching people being caregivers, but actually being a caregiver myself too. So that brings us to today and to this session and an affiliate partnership between ourselves, Positivity Center, and Safe Care BC, basically because we started to notice, we just noticed that there was this need for healing and the ability to cope with loss in our industry. And so I just wanted to ask all of you to be able participants in this conversation. I talk, but there's not a whole lot of me necessarily facilitating and putting information down your throats or into your minds. It's really an active kind of experience that we go through when we do this session together. So if you are able and you can and you feel comfortable, I just want to invite you to please turn on your camera. That would be absolutely great. If you can't and don't feel comfortable, that is totally fine. We are all adults and I respect each of you wherever you are coming from. That is just totally fine. So I won't be sharing like a slide presentation or anything like that. It'll be kind of a brief introduction. We're going to do sort of 3 different sections. And each section, after I kind of introduce what the section is about and the kinds of questions we need to be asking one another, you'll break off into breakout rooms and you'll have the same breakout room partners throughout the whole entire session. So you'll start breakout room 1 and then breakout room 2 and breakout room 3 with the same people. And that's where you guys get to decide, how much you want to share. And I think everyone's sort of at a different space in that. So I just ask that everyone, can raise their hand and agree to that whatever is shared in this session remains confidential, and just that we all agree to create a really psychologically safe space for everyone that we are talking to today. So if I can get everyone to agree to that, that would just be fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. But what I want to do also is talk to you in the chat. So thank you to those who are able to turn on their cameras. It's great to see you. What have you lost, or what are the things that people lose that they need to manage and cope alongside this journey of life with? Just type in the chat. Maybe it's something that you yourself have lost and are managing right now or coping with right now. Maybe it's something that somebody else in your life has been dealing with, or maybe it's something that came to your awareness over the last couple of years where we had to deal with COVID and all of the protocol and the loss and the shifts that were created because of that. What do we lose, or what have you lost? If you can't get the chat, then you can unmute yourselves and just share. what typically comes is sort of, we lose people we love, right? Yeah, exactly. So someone's lost their mom 8 weeks ago. I'm sorry to hear that. We lose our jobs. Anyone lost a job? Loss of hope for family members, seeing people struggle with mental health. Yeah. What else comes to mind? Lose someone that we're close to and someone that we're providing some support to. That leaves a gap too, doesn't it? No matter what you've lost, feel free to just keep putting it, what you've lost or who you've lost in the chat. We've got a friend as well. One of the things I hope that you see is that, grief is universal. We all have lost somebody that we loved, or we've lost a way of doing something. We've lost how we particularly interact with people, like a practice. Those are all losses too. Loss usually gets, the thing that first comes up is losing people we love, which is obviously usually a very, very hard and long and up and down process. But definitely there are things that we lose that we don't even realize sometimes. So what I remember facilitating a session actually last spring, like in the middle of everything still. And I asked a group of caregivers, what was one small thing that could fuel their well-being? And basically no one had an answer for me, because that's just how it felt. Like it just felt like their environment, what they did, who they were, how they lived, how they worked, wasn't really a conducive environment to fueling their well-being. And that's what sometimes it can feel like when we're experiencing grief. And then the interesting thing about grief is I just want to tell you guys, so there's a book out there, I'm not sure if you've ever read of it, called the Grief Recovery Handbook. It's been my own personal guide through my own personal journeys of moving, losing people that I love in my life, and helping my kids through grief. And I've used that book quite often. And there he defines grief as the emotional response to loss. And I bring that up because I think sometimes we have this approach that we can think our way through grief, and we can't think our way through grief. Like, I just want you to think about that and write that down, right? We cannot think our way through grief. We feel our way through it. And if you're human like me, you can probably tell that you're feeling an emotion of some kind, but you might even be able to label it if you've had some experience in that space. But then you rationalize it and it goes into your head and you want to intellectualize it. You want it to go away, or you don't even know how to deal with that at all. So that's what this conversation is really about. It's going to just be an experience for us to actually move into the emotions that are present. And it might be difficult for some of you. So you can, decide how hard you're willing to move into and lean into that ugly space. But there's nothing wrong with you, and sometimes in that Grief Recovery Handbook, he talks often about grief getting kind of disguised as depression. And sometimes people will go and they'll get medication from their doctors, but that doesn't help us heal from the grief. So that's what we're going to do. We're just going to try to heal a little bit and take some time and share some stories and share some emotions. And then at the end, in the very last breakout session, your thought process goes to, or your feeling process goes to, okay, what can I do? What's one small thing I can do to help me heal, move forward, acknowledge what I'm feeling, honor the person that I've lost, whatever that is for you. So there's nothing wrong with you. We're not here to fix anything today. We're just here to be and just, move into that experience with one another. Okay, so just wanted to say one more thing before I tell you what this first breakout session is going to be, is the chat says somebody lost the man that they married. He has dementia. He's still here. His body's here, but he's different. And that's a really good example of loss as well, because the person that we once knew is no longer. So there's a grief there too. And so absolutely, I'm really glad that you put that in there. So thank you very much for all your participation, everybody. Okay, so this is how it's going to work. We're going to go into breakout session 1, and that is going to be really all about your story. Any one of us has something happen, and we have a story in which we have handled that. So this first breakout session is really just an opportunity for you to share what's happened, to you, through you, with the people that you've loved. What's your narrative around that? And, some things that you might want to discuss when you're discussing your narrative are, what do you wish would have been different? What hopes or dreams did you have that aren't possible anymore? And what's missing from your well-being as a result of that? So those are just sort of some guiding questions. I'm going to actually copy them and put them into the chat. So you have access to the questions that'll just sort of help. They're just meant to be guides to your conversation. You don't have to answer these questions. You don't have to ask these questions of your partner. But what'll end up happening is you'll be in a group, and then I just need somebody to kind of monitor that time. We're going to have 15 minutes in the first breakout session. So if you get in a group with 2 people, split that in half. If it's 3 people, make sure you each get 5 minutes, and have someone kind of just monitor the time so that you all get sort of the same amount of time, and you're able to explain your story the way that you want to, and in as much depth as you want to. So like I said, just you get to decide how you need to show up for yourself and what you're willing to share, just because obviously we understand that you're meeting some people for the first time. These could be strangers, and we just want you to feel as safe as possible. So before I know Garrett will kind of get these breakout rooms sort of settled up in the back, but before we move to the breakout session, does anyone have any questions? Because this is, it might feel kind of weird. Like, what do you mean we're going to go into breakout session? Well, we're going to do, right? This is about an experience of coping with grief. It's not about us talking about, trying on these steps or thinking about it this way. We're just going to move into conversation. So it might be a bit of a different experience for some of you, but if you do have questions, please feel free. Okay. So Garrett, if you could queue us up for our breakout sessions, that would be great. And I will see you guys back here in the main session in 15. Thanks. Okay. Well, welcome back, everybody. I hope that you found yourselves sharing a little bit about you and what's been happening for you, with you, and with the people that you love. I always like to bring us back to sort of the group space where, we can just share what our experience was or what we noticed when we were having those conversations with one another. So some things that, kind of come up for people is this idea of grief being compounded. That's kind of one of the, I would say, if you will, not the triggers, one of the things I noticed with each story, in completely different stories, but layers upon layers, right, of loss. And so I call that compounded grief. So that's pretty huge. And then also knowing that everyone's story is so different, but yet there's a common denominator, right? The common denominator is the experience of loss is completely universal. And that's the one thing that we can really unite on and come together, heart to heart with the people that we're having conversations with. And then, I'm sharing just from my group, and anyone else from my group can share what they saw. The noticing of, now I can't remember what it was that I was going to say. Came to me and it left. Shoot. I'll leave it open to you and it'll come to me while somebody's sharing, and then I'll share it at the end. What did you notice in your groups? You can just take yourself off mute, and if you can't unmute yourself, just put it in the chat.
Once again, just how we're all feeling, even though our pain is from different sources, we're all feeling pain. And, and to remember, I guess that does connect us, even though once again, our situations are very different.
Yeah. So true.
In our group, we noticed those of us who were able to share are all dealing with sort of an ongoing grief. Our loved ones haven't passed necessarily, but we are grieving different kinds of loss or changes in ability.
Yeah, I think it's like, that's pretty critical to just acknowledge, right? Sometimes you kind of get that, oh, everything should be fine. They're still here, right? Lucky you, they're still here. They're still alive. But
on the bright side.
right? Look on the bright side. And like, that's usually what I start my intro with is like, oh my gosh, never say at least in this discussion. Yeah, like that's, it's not allowed. It's forbidden. It's foul language. It's swear words here. Yeah, because it doesn't acknowledge, what it is, that pain, that loss, that suffering. Yeah.
One of the things, sorry, I was just going to say, one of the things that I've noticed is because of my trauma and a few things, I try really hard to fix everything. And so what I've tried to do, be very conscious of now when I'm communicating with people and they're sharing something, I ask myself, am I expressing empathy or am I trying to fix their situation? And if I'm trying to fix their situation, then I need to stop immediately. And teasing them into a good mood, just being conscious of those details and adjusting what I'm doing.
Yeah. And sorry, Lynn, you were going to share as well?
Yeah, I was just going to add to what Victoria was saying in our group, that we found a commonality with having a struggle trying to focus on our own self-care because our situations are ongoing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in some ways, even though if it may be a situation that clears and another one starts, or it's the same situation that shifts and changes over time, but it's still there, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I was going to say that for me, the last thing I was going to share is that the value of conversation, just having conversation and which is why we have this session, is something we can all do for one another that we may not necessarily think we can do. And sometimes it's because, in our group, we were talking about the difference between empathy and sympathy. And I was talking about that Brene Brown clip on the difference between the two, and just how all we really just need to do is have those conversations so we can be with that person. But those conversations are hard. And like Jennifer mentioned, sometimes we go to this fix place so quickly, but we just need to feel with them, right? And that's where we begin to just have connection and build trust and build rapport and have somebody just, I guess, kind of comfort us, like I do these intentional prayers every morning. And like one day I said to my mom, I want to show up broken today. And she said, what? Like, how can you decide that you just want to show up broken? And she's like, are you sure you don't want to show up differently? And I'm like, no, today I want to show up broken, because if I show up broken, that means I'll feel comforted. Like, that's how I viewed it. Right. But most people are like, you can't do that. Like, why would you want to show up broken? Well, because I am, like, and there's nothing wrong with it. Like, but there's this idea out there that we can't be broken, we can't be hurting, we can't be sad, and then there's this like suffocating that's happening because we can't actually acknowledge what it is that we're feeling. And interestingly enough, when I reflect on that day where that was how I chose to show up, I actually did feel better by the end of the day. I wasn't like, on cloud nine, but I was definitely feeling calm. And I think it was partially because I just acknowledged exactly how I was feeling. And that's really sort of the idea here, is that we just get to talk about our stories without any judgment and without any pressure to fix something or make it better or improve it or like solve it. Sometimes you just need to be in it. So seeing some heads nod. So this is resonating with you, and I hope so. All right. So every story is unique and every relationship is special. Everything we had in our lives, whether it was practice, habit, person, special in a different way. And I really love what you said, Jennifer, about, it's pain. It's pain from a different source, but it's pain nonetheless. So with one of the things I first said when we were kind of doing the introduction was that we cannot think our way through grief. And so this next part of the conversation is a breakout session about the emotional side of things. And it doesn't mean that you can't have a conversation if you're not an emotional expert. All it means is that you're just willing to have a conversation about the emotions that may be coming up for you, or you maybe have been ignoring. We all have a different level of awareness in terms of what we notice we're feeling. And so this is a conversation for you to just, go into that space and just notice what it is that you might have been feeling. Because anytime, we think we're thinking beings, but really we aren't. We are feeling beings. We are emotional creatures. And there's been like so many studies done inside the brain that actually share and show that we experience the emotion before we experience the thought. It's just that I think we've gotten so used to thinking that we think the thought that we think the thought before we actually feel the emotion, but we feel the emotion first. And so this is where I want this conversation to go, is into that emotional space. So like with the previous one, whatever you feel comfortable with, it may feel uncomfortable. It's okay if it feels uncomfortable. It's okay if there's tears. It's okay if you feel it somewhere in your body. It's okay if there's color associated with it or whatever. But this might be kind of something that it will be helpful, for sure. It will be helpful. But it just may not necessarily feel good right in that moment, if you know what I mean. So the next kind of questions that I really want you to talk about, I'm going to put them in the chat as well, are just simply, they're really simple. Okay, what emotions have come up for you? So the first breakout session was, okay, what has happened? What am I going through? This is what I'm dealing with. And the second conversation is like, how are the emotions showing up? And what are the emotions showing up? And the thing about emotions is, and everyone's got a different descriptor of what an emotion is, but for me, they're teachers. And emotions are there, they're showing up to tell you something. They're giving you information. So this is your opportunity to sit with those emotions and ask them. Like literally, I have conversations with my emotions and I'm like, okay, anger, like, why are you here? What is it that you're teaching me? Because there's something to learn. And if we can learn that, then we can actually process the emotion there that's associated with it. And in tune, the other thing that you'll notice is that you might think it's one emotion. If somebody says to you in the conversation, I just feel angry. I just feel guilty, like whatever it is that keeps coming up for them. Well, what's behind that? Because sometimes people will, like, here's a really classic one. Somebody says they feel lonely. And if I go deeper into a conversation with them, what I notice is sometimes, not always, but sometimes in some cases, they're bored. And if you're experiencing boredom and not as much loneliness, then you're like, oh, what can I learn from that? And how can I process that? It might be getting curious. It might be doing something that you're interested in doing, or learning something new, or whatever it is. Like, you get to have a relationship with that emotion. And the more specific you can get about what that emotion is and what the underlying emotions are, because sometimes we'll go to happy, sad, frustrated, angry, and excited, because they seem to be more the surface level ones that everyone knows, vocabulary to express. But there are other emotions there too. So this is a time to just, ask somebody in your group questions to help them go deeper into that emotion. Like, what else could it be? What is it trying to teach you? And what can you learn from it? And when's it showing up? And so those are sort of guiding questions for this next breakout session, which is really just a space to just ask yourself what it is that you feel emotionally. So does anyone have any questions about that breakout session, or we're all good? All right, so this is part 2 of the experience. I will see you back here in 15 minutes, and then we can have a debrief of what that was like for all of you. Wow. Well, I got so much to say. I think that our session was so profound in so many ways. And this is also an opportunity just to start thinking about the things that you noticed during your session together with the people that you got to share with and had the privilege to share alongside. One of the things that sort of came up is that we all have the potential to be there for each other, but we need to really take notice of how much capacity we have and be open, honest, and upfront with ourselves and with each other on where we're at with that, so that we can actually be resources. Because I think one of the things that came up in our group is that, we're all looking for resources. And I mean, here, this session is a resource for you, and you guys found it. But we've been trained to go to the same place over and over again for resources, and we need to train ourselves to go to other places. And then, of course, one of the big aha moments for me was, I'm like, wow, we're all here having this conversation and really wanted to support one another. We are resources for one another. And to realize that we actually can, through conversation and support and empathy and compassion, just be here for one another as a resource. And that is a resource, so it's shifting our lens and our view of, well, what is a resource? And do we keep going to the same place to find it, right? One of the things I shared with my group is, I remember my father telling me from a young girl, never put all your eggs in one basket. And so where are we going to find resources? And can we get creative about the kinds of resources that we want to have, out there for one another? Like, this session is actually, birthed out of, a space like that, because I understand that this session isn't, I'm not a qualified grief psychologist to tell you follow these steps, but I also know that journeying through this with somebody and having empathy and compassion for you is also a resource. And so that's why this whole conversation was even created in the first place. So what has become something that you've noticed when you were having your group share? It's wonderful to meet you too in the chat there. It's just so wonderful. You can type it in the chat what you noticed, or please feel free to unmute yourselves and share with the group if you feel comfortable.
I was just going to say, I think one of our strongest tools is our ability to talk to other people and hear what they use in their own personal life. So when someone is willing to share their story with me, I always feel very privileged, because I'm going to learn something, and that is something that I might, and that tool is something that I'm going to be able to use to take forward and potentially either, support myself or pass that support tool on to someone else. So definitely the flow of information, I think, is really important, and we should stop being ashamed of sharing.
I have something to add, but I just wanted to make sure that I left space for anyone else who wanted to add something to that, because one of the emotions that came up was the potential for shame or guilt to show up, right? So that's another emotion that it's not usually very helpful, put it that way, right? And yet at the same time, it's going to show up. And so if we can actually call it out as it is and find ways to move through it, it's very powerful to be able to do it alongside with somebody, because otherwise you'll get, we were talking a lot about Brene Brown on our breakout session, and how, the shame, the guilt drives disconnection, and we really need to make sure that we're connected with one another. So obviously, if you're going to just get stuck in feeling the shame, I'm not saying the shame won't show up. It'll show up, but how are you going to process it? And are you going to call it out and just say, I can create a different story, and I can do that alongside somebody else, and I've got people in my corner. And, the more you connect and reach out to people, the more you realize that you do have connections and people that can help you, and tools and resources, and being able to see what's happening. Like Jennifer just said, seeing what somebody else is doing, and for someone else to be willing to share. I mean, that all takes us showing up to be vulnerable right here, to actually be willing to share, so that we can take nuggets away from one another, right? And sometimes it's really, really very simple. Sometimes what I see happen on these calls is a shift in a belief or an approach. And that even of itself is a tool as well. So we don't always have to take away this like new practice or a habit, but sometimes it's even just a new way of looking at things that can be helpful. One of the supportive resources we created for caregivers was called Emotional Nourishment. And in that, I actually talk about emotions being more like sticky notes and less like super glue. So when we experience emotions, they don't have to define, who we are. And I'm not talking about clinical depression and anxiety and mood disorders and that kind of thing, but I am just talking about the overall emotional experience that quite often, when we can just detach ourselves from being the emotion and just experiencing the emotion for a short while until we can process it and have it serve us, well, that's an important piece of the puzzle. Did anyone get clarity on other emotions that were present that they weren't aware of when they went into that breakout session, just out of curiosity? Okay, everyone has a different experience, so just wondered. Okay. Okay, so the last breakout session is that time and place where we just spend some time thinking about where to from here. One of the things that Marga and Garrett will send to all the participants is a resource page. So I mean, we've already talked a lot about resources and tools. We've created one that uses some positive psychology interventions and tools, outside resources for you to explore a little further or deeper. And so I'd really encourage you when you get that to have a look at it, try something that maybe might even be not what you would normally do. Just give it a little bit of an experiment and see if it's of benefit to you. Because one of the things here is like sometimes we are experiencing an emotion and we feel like it's never going to leave. And it probably will come back again, especially if it's some like chronic and compounded emotion that you've been experiencing for a long time. But there is a danger, obviously, of experiencing a lot of negative emotions at one time and never processing or moving through them as they develop like this tunnel. I call it a downward spiral. And one of the people in the chat, who was this again? I think it was Lisa in our group, just shared about, feeling sad, but also looking for enjoyment. And so I think that's where this next conversation goes is, okay, I do feel pain. I am hurting. I feel sorrow. I feel hopeless. I feel helpless. I feel overwhelmed, and I can still do something. And so what is it that you're going to be able to do for you that is going to help nourish you and prevent you from going so far down into that downward spiral, right? It's not about not acknowledging. It's not about not honoring people that you've loved and lost, because sometimes I remember one of the first sessions we did, there was this lady who actually decided she didn't really want to do a party. She didn't feel like it, but she decided that because her friend that she had lost, that was something that was really important to her and meaningful for her that she loved doing. She did it. She did it to honor that person. And so, yes, it was some kind of awkward for her because it was, parties are kind of like celebrations and you're going into a happy space you don't really want to. And that's a very extreme example. But this next part of the breakout sessions and conversation is really just about what are some simple things that you can do for you. That was something that person decided, and that really worked for her. And it helped her feel so purposeful and so intentional when she left the call. That doesn't need to be something big. It can be something really small. Like I said, maybe it's a certain somebody that you want to reach out to and have a conversation, or maybe you want to go have a good cry, or maybe it's a bubble bath, or maybe you want to do a meditation. Maybe you want to just journal like what it is that you're feeling. I don't know what it is for you, but you're going to have to just figure something really tiny. That's really what this next little bit is about. Just figuring it really something tiny, that how you can honor yourself or honor the grief or honor the person. What is possible? There is something possible for you. So what is that? So these are some, I'm going to put these questions in the chat again as well. That will help guide this breakout session. I have this kind of a bit long, these questions, but hopefully they're helpful. So you can ask these questions exactly as they're written. You can just use them as guidance, whatever it is that you feel that will move you in that conversation, you just do. But the whole idea is just finding something small for you that'll nourish your heart and your soul as you move forward out of this conversation and into your life and your work and to your kids and to your families and your friends and all the other roles that you do. So how about Garrett, you get those sessions up and running, and then I will see you all back in 15 minutes, and then we can do a debrief. Welcome back. It's good to see so many faces here. So thinking about your kind of end session there, what was something nourishing that you took away, whether you want to take yourself off mute or you want to put it in the chat? Maybe it was a refresher of something you used to do that you haven't been doing anymore. Was it a new thought or a new belief? Is it something new that you haven't done before? What came up for you that would be nourishing for you to feel, think, or do as you move from this session to life? And if it's just sit and cry, then I want to hear it.
Our group discussed self-care,
Hmm.
really focusing on self-care. And I myself, you know, through listening to the stories of the other participants, kind of had, like, as I said, I guess an epiphany, a moment of, we ourselves have done the best that we can, and we have to acknowledge that we ourselves have done our best, and we have to remind ourselves of that. And I guess that is part of the self-care and self-talk. That and getting out and good old Mother Nature, because Mother Nature seems to soothe the most wounded souls.
I'm so glad you said that. You've all done your best. Yes. I hope you feel that today. KSIMM. Is it Kim or
Kim.
Okay. You had yourself on mute as well. What came for you?
I guess for me, there was a wonderful story about how they had planned a trip, and her mom passed away just a few weeks before the trip, and she didn't want to, was thinking about not going, and her husband had reminded her about her mom, how her mom would have kicked her butt if she wasted that money and gone there and mourned and cried. So I thought that was a great reminder, remembering what people would have, or what your parent or friend would have said to you if you were
Yeah.
not living life.
Such a good honoring experience, isn't it? Yeah. That's the word that comes to mind for me when you share that. Victoria, what comes to mind for you?
I would say with our group, we're dealing with a slightly different kind of picture. All three of us who were vocal in our group were dealing with sort of a long-term grief. Our people are still with us. And we talked about living in the moment, setting an intention, being vigilant around signs of our own depression, because there's a certain repetition that can happen where you get worn down. And so you have to find joy in every day, even if it's just a hot cup of tea. It's the little things and the little moments that you have to focus on, and not necessarily the big picture. It's about getting through today.
Yeah, one of the things that I came across in, I think, our number 2 breakout session was just the moment by moment, day by day, right?
Yep.
And I think you're bang on. You know, we have to view the ordinary as extraordinary to help it fuel our well-being. Because if we don't, that's exactly what happens. We just find ourselves basically tumbling down a hill, and we can't catch ourselves once the momentum is built, where you just keep going down, right? Yeah. So good. And that's true. I'm so glad that the 3 of you were able to talk about similar life experiences with one another, because it almost feels like it's never going to end. So you have to find ways to pause with intention, to fill and fill and fill, because there's so much expending that's going on, right? Yeah. I just really want to thank all of you. I hope that you all walked away with, one little nugget, or possibly a new connection, someone else to have a conversation with, a new modality. Take these questions and, use them on yourself, journal with them, use them in conversation with other people, take them to your work. Feel free to use them as you want. I recently came across a book called Compassionomics that I wanted to share with all of you. And I had a beautiful opportunity to interview Dr. Trizek, who wrote the book, because I have this little show called Wellbeing Networks. And, one of the things he said is that empathy is feeling and compassion is action. And when we look at the brain when it's scanned in MRI, empathy shows up as the pain centers of the brain highlighted up. And compassion shows that the brain is, the reward centers of the brain are lighting up when someone experiences compassion. And I mean, that bit of research has hit me like a ton of bricks, because that's exactly what we're doing in this session. Is we are experiencing empathy by talking about our stories, talking about the emotions that are coming up, and we're being there for one another. And at the end, we're like, what's one small thing? And so many of you have shared that. It's just something really tiny. It's so small. I was sharing with my group that he shared with me this beautiful little story. You know, he's a physician in Jersey, and he was with a patient, and he just said to the patient, or asked him, what's one small thing that I could do, you know, for you to make your day just that little bit better? And the gentleman asked him to feed him his eggs. And so he did. And he said that was so filling for him and for me. And one of the things that came from my conversation with him was self-care is so important. And we have to move from empathy to compassion. And we do that by taking really small actions. And the one thing that's key that we are typically not necessarily encouraged to see or to try is doing self-care in connection with others. So everyone who thought of a self-care thing today, kudos to you. I want you to add doing it with someone else to that experience, because it's that place where we talk about building a new resource and a new tool. That's where that happens. So, and check out his book, or you can check out my interview with him. It was so much fun. We do eventually need to move from empathy, which is the feeling component that lights up the pain centers of our brain, to compassion, which is the action component that lights up the reward centers of our brain. And that's where small bits, little over time, heal. So I also in the chat put my emotional nourishment video. If any of you want to check it out, it might be helpful for some of you if you struggled with that emotional conversation, and my LinkedIn contact. So I'd love to keep in touch with any of you. If you want some help doing this, you know, for yourself again, a coach, a support person, another conversation person to talk to, person to come and do this at your workplace, I'd love to keep in touch. So let's keep having these conversations, and thanks to all of you for being so open and vulnerable and coming on here and just sharing, you know, what it looks like to actually cope with loss and grief. So thank you so much.